Good morning. It is Wednesday, October 28th, and we are doing a couple of things, which is focused on defunding and disbanding and kind of the necessary jargon as opposed to the actual meaning of defund and disband. And then also we're going to take a look at how media and some of the media influences these instances of escalation, de-escalation, and how it has played a part in the highlighted police incidents throughout our country. So first we get back to the defund and disband. Doug, again, we want to say it with heavy hearts. We send out our best to your law enforcement agency, because I know the laying to rest of Sergeant Preston is on its way here soon. So we want to remember him. And he's not the only person in law enforcement throughout our country that has served and been adversely affected in the line of duty. But we do want to say we send our best as that situation concludes.
We truly appreciate that. We do. It means a lot to us here in Houston.
Thank you. But again, as we mentioned, defund and disband. Kevin, you had said that no agency's really going to disband, correct? That there are municipal charters in place in towns and established communities that are not going to allow for no law enforcement. Is that correct?
Okay, I don't know if it was my phone or one of us lost our signal during part of that. So you'll have to repeat it for me. Sure.
Effectively, there will be some type of law enforcement in any established municipality. And when you talk about defunding and disbanding police, because you see it a lot now as we have political ads of one elected official saying that they are okay with supporting these types of measures or not, that truly doesn't mean you'll have no law enforcement in a municipality or established community. Is that correct?
Okay, well then my phone started ringing during the comment, but I think I got the gist of your question. And here's the thing about disbanding a police. You're right. Every municipality, every governmental subdivision that is incorporated has a duty, as a statutory duty, to provide public safety services to their citizens. Now, they can do that by forming their own law enforcement agency, or they can do it by contracting with the sheriff's office in that county, or contracting with some other law enforcement agency to provide those services. But they have to provide the services. The question of disbanding a police department would be exactly that. It would be switching from having your own police department to contracting with some other law enforcement agency to provide those services. Defunding depends on who's using the word. You know, the term, if you strictly interpret the word, look at the definition of the word, defunding means you're no longer going to fund, and therefore you're simply not going to provide those services. I think you're right. I think a lot of politicians, when they start using the term, and advocates and activists, they say, no, we're not talking about disbanding. We're just talking about reducing. We're talking about limiting the amount of resources that we're providing to our law enforcement agency to provide the services. The question is, can you provide? Are you reducing funding to the point that you cannot adequately provide the services that you are statutorily obligated to provide?
Right. Okay. Well, I think a lot of people believe all of a sudden police are going to go away, and we're going to have this free society where everybody's just going to check each other, and if you're good with your neighbor and moving along and everything goes like that. That is not the case. And that is one thing that I think was heavy on my mind after we had the discussion of that's probably getting misunderstood in
Well,
the
I don't know that it's being misunderstood. It is being proposed. It's being advocated. Campaign Zero, Black Lives Matter, the Austin Justice Coalition all have as one of their objectives a world without police. So there are at least some groups that are in fact advocating that we do away with police and that we reimagine, that we come up with some other alternative to police.
again.
I think you and I are in agreement that's simply not possible. As long as we are going to be a nation of laws, we have to have somebody who's going to enforce those laws. We can call them whatever you want to call them, but there's got to be somebody enforcing the laws.
Right, exactly. And so again, that's something I think that really from the initial statements of this need to be clarified. And there may be people that say we want none of that. Again, it's a responsibility of an incorporated municipality or community to provide that service. And if anyone thinks that that works without that support is probably, I understand maybe why you say it because of incidents, but it's not going to be a very safe or stable community. I mean, Rudy, you're a member of a municipality on its council. Protecting and serving the citizens that you represent is a very basic and primary function of your council as an incorporated city and town. And you and the rest of your council members can't oversee the thousands of people in your community as a group of 5, 8, 10, or what have you. You have to have mechanisms to ensure that public safety, and this is how you do it.
Yeah, and I think what you're saying is that, for our city, for Pflugerville, absolutely, our department is, one of our, honestly, one of our proudest things we are in the city because of not only the services it has to serve and protect and put their lives on the line for our citizens, but at the same time, for them to be in and about the community, not necessarily overseeing the community, but being a part of the community. And that's probably the big essential difference that we see various departments and what they can or cannot do. We've had these discussions over the last several months about that, about the importance of true community policing and how it's not something that you just write about, it's not something that you just speak about, it's actually true actions and you need to know about those things. I think that, Kevin, to your point, and I wonder if some of these groups who are saying a world without policing, are they trying to imagine a world where there's utter peace or something along those lines? I'm trying to figure out where they're trying to get from that. And, and I think that we all agree, yeah, we'd love it. We can just, be in the honor system with everything else that goes on in our lives. But realistically speaking, one of the essential advocates and responsibilities of when you are part of a city, one of the things that you bargain with, that bargain, becomes a freedom and you become part of a citizen in a certain country is protection. And you have an expectation to have that protection. You have that expectation that, people will look out for you and that, and so therefore not only you yourself, but your family and your loved ones will be safe with that. And, I can understand a conversation about saying, hey, ultimately, it would be great if we didn't need police and we didn't need everything else with that as well. But I also think we have to be pragmatic and honest about these assessments and see about, hey, wait a minute. Okay, that's a great goal. Batman's goal. He wants to end all crime. That is a great, wonderful goal. Understand that, Batman, with that. But realistically speaking, he knows that that's not going to happen. And, he fights toward that. That's his ultimate goal. Good for him. Good on him with that. And while we're working toward a goal where we reduce crime, reduce all these things, which, we've seen an uptick in various different things about that, we've got to have a pragmatic discussion about how we look at law enforcement and what we can do. And I think that Doug has said it numerous times about, when we're talking about efforts regarding community policing, him and Fred have said, hey, listen, if you're going to cut services or cut funding in these things, the first thing that's going to go are community policing efforts. And so, I think that there has to be a way to be able to dovetail, work on those things and make them, it's not an either or scenario, but that's a very strong statement. And that's something that I don't know if people are cognizant about when they're busy talking about these efforts and they truly want better policing, because you see the polls over and over again. And I get very aggravated is a nice way of me to put it. When people say that Black people of color don't like police, that's crap. And anyone who's feeding you that, that's just plain crap. The polls over and over again is that, if anything, we want more law enforcement, patrolling and working in our communities. What we don't like is what everyone else shouldn't like either. They're bad cops. That's it. That's what we like. And that's what we should be working toward. We should be looking, if we're talking about elimination of that, elimination of bad officers, that should be what's being spoken about. And maybe if, Kevin, if they ever sit down with you and have a conversation with you over, over a beer or coffee or something like that as well, maybe that's where a good baseline would be with a discussion with these groups and say, hey, listen, we're all for getting rid of bad police officers. How about we start there and then let's see what we can do.
Well, hey, Councilman, this is one of the things that you have to look at. There are several different groups out there, okay? There's a group of anarchists that do not want policing, period. They want to be the Rough Riders. They want to be out there running the show, doing whatever they want to do, when they want to do it, with nobody to put them in check. That's the group that has hijacked a lot of the Black Lives Matter movement. The true Black Lives Matter movement, and I honestly believe there's two factions of them as well. And I say that because there's a group that want a better society, a better police force, a better community relation, all of that, which is we are in total agreement for. There's another group of them that is more, I don't want to say radical, but they're more in line with the anarchists to say, hey, we don't need police, we can handle our own. Stay out of our neighborhoods, we'll take care of everything. And that is the group right there that I consider the most dangerous. And the reason I do that is because they can sway people on either side. They can bring people into the middle to where they're gonna want to dismantle a police department like they did up north, and then the county comes in and takes over. The policing aren't, like Kevin said, they're not gonna leave. So we have to, I want what everybody else wants. I want a good police department. I want a good relationship with our community. There's only one way to do that, and that's through communication. Anarchists don't want to communicate. They don't care. They want to go out and tear stuff up and have a lawless society. I can't buy into that one. So we have to make sure that when we're having these conversations, we have the right people in there. Absolutely. And that's my 2 cents.
No,
we can't agree with, and we can't buy into this concept of making the decision that a cop is a bad cop based upon inaccurate or blatantly false information. We cannot let the media or the activists or the advocates make those determinations. Whether or not a cop is a bad cop should be based upon the totality of the circumstances. It should be based upon all the evidence that is available. There should be a complete and thorough vetting of the facts. And unfortunately, this conversation has taken on an aspect of we're going to condemn the police officers immediately, no matter what. And that's unhealthy. That's bad public policy.
And Kevin, to that point, that's probably one of the more frustrating things about this conversation is that, just like you said, you have to be able to go through the system, and through a transparent way to be able to hold people, him or her, accountable in these things. And you got to be honest and look at things objectively with the facts that are applicable to that. And I think that, Doug brought this up weeks ago, actually maybe months ago. I mean, we've all been talking forever now, it all blends in, about the actual procedural systems that are put in place and whether or not, how do we, the civil service, and whether or not, okay, if we're actually going to go through the process, How do we do that? And is it a true transparent process? And how officers would be all for, hey, listen, as the process is going to be transparent and everyone's going to be able to see it, there are these facts, that's one thing. If it's going to be where a council member or a chief who's mad at an officer can sandbag the system and not allow for, a certain officer to be able to go and have a true, honest assessment regarding what actions were taking place and are under the spotlight, it's a different conversation. And maybe that's what, I think to myself, just thinking about this further, Kevin, is that, if we talk about it from that standpoint, look at the process and procedures, because it seems like everyone agrees on both sides, have it be a transparent process. Now, have it a process where it's a fair, and not arbitrary and capricious process. Maybe that's a good starting point with these things, because Doug's right that you're gonna have some of these groups, they're just trying to raise Cain, right? They're trying to take advantage of a situation, and they know that they can at these moments right here as well. And that's the stuff we need to push back. And I'm really glad to see a lot of particularly African-American groups pushing back on some of these groups. Hey, wait a minute, what are you doing? Wait, this is, no, this is not what we're talking about here. Don't just come into our neighborhood saying you're speaking for us when you don't really know what the issues are. And you're really just trying to put your own agenda on these things with that as well. And, the question is, how do we get productive about doing that? And maybe this is a good reset point, our society to start having those discussions. And then I think some of the reason why Stephen, when he proposed us meeting with you guys every week and, and talking to you guys about these issues, well, it's really important because, as lawyers, we're leaders in the community and we have an obligation, to the law and to the Constitution of Texas and the United States. While at the same time, we're advocates for folks and we can understand and reach people in different ways that may not necessarily be able to do so. So I think we're in a unique role and we have a unique responsibility to be smart, be prepared, and be honest and transparent in how we address these issues.
Yeah, and I think, well said, Rudy. No one has ever deviated, and Kevin, you were the first one to say it. It's not that, law enforcement is bad, but even police, the biggest thing that they don't like are bad police because it gets in the way of the services and the functions that police and law enforcement were set out to do. And again, I've been around you, Kevin, for a couple decades now, and that's why the relationship is there and was easy to connect.
Wait, how old are you?
Look good, man. That's just all you need to know is I look good. I'm seasonably mature council member, and the thing being, hopefully over that time, Rudy, is that we've recognized that we've done a lot more together than apart, and that Texans, and that's the beautiful thing. We don't say we're Black Texans, we're white Texans, we're Czech Texans, we're Irish Texans, we're Mexican Texans. We say we're Texans. And Texans want to be able to protect that which is Texas. We don't want anarchy in Texas. We don't want unrest in Texas. Texas, when we go outside of the 254 counties, we represent a whole another country. And people see that. So within our boundaries and our borders, we must protect what we have, because no one else is really going to come in and do that. Yes, you could have a federal government at a very rare instance do that. So what we would need to do is through training, understanding who may be biased, and biased people probably aren't good for a police force, who may have idiosyncrasies, probably not good for a police force, but those who can be somewhat impartial, somewhat trainable to a point to be able to act in certain circumstances, that's the group of people you want to pool together and select, train, and teach, and then involve in protecting and serving communities.
And there's a difference. We have to understand there's a difference between bad police and bad policing. There's a difference there. A bad officer who can't get his crap together and goes out and do stupid stuff all the time is one thing. That's a bad officer. If you've got an officer going out and doing bad training, that's a separate one. And I blame our departments right now for a lack of training, a lack of proper policies and procedures in place to take care of the issues that we have. You've got to have the ability to address an issue at that moment. And that's our problem with this department, or any department for that matter. They want to sit there and go, oh, well, we're going to review this, we're going to investigate this, we're going to do this, when most of the stuff can be corrected right then. Have that conversation with that officer and say, hey, you screwed up the scene over here. This is what you did wrong. This is how you have to fix it. But most departments don't do that. They want to investigate. They're going to take 180 days to look at a scene that you should have had a 30-minute conversation with this guy up front. And guess what? That never happens again. But no, we're going to drag this out, discipline some guy 6 months from now. That's like me going to my kid and going, watching him tear something up in a restaurant. And then a week from now, I'm going to chew him, spank his butt, and send him on his way and explain to him what he did wrong then. No, it's got to be immediate. My 2 cents again.
Yeah, and again,
We've
I think,
also,
go ahead, Kev.
I was going to say, we also have to acknowledge, and I think we have to help educate our citizens, that the system does in fact work the vast majority of the time. The fact that the media doesn't report it accurately, the fact that it gets blown up on social media with false narratives, with disinformation, doesn't change the fact that the system works. If you believe the rhetoric, cops are never held accountable. And we've talked about this repeatedly. I can go down a list of cops that have been fired, cops that have been indicted, cops that are currently sitting in prison for things that they've done in the line of duty. How do you argue that cops are not held accountable when they are being demoted, suspended, terminated, indicted, and jailed? That's accountability. It works the vast majority of the time. So instead of throwing out the rhetoric, we should, and eventually I'm hoping we're going to get to this, we can start talking about the specific anecdotal cases that are being looked at, and people saying, see, there's an example of cops not being held accountable. Let's talk about the specifics of those cases. A lot of them are cases that we haven't even finished investigating yet. Anyway, I think we have to push back against the rhetoric in order for this conversation to be truly meaningful.
Well, again, Doug, you had made. Go ahead, Cliff.
Real quickly, just to add to what Kevin's already saying, if you're following the Philadelphia shooting yesterday or day before yesterday, what I've seen a lot on the media is interviewing an individual, and this guy looks like he's got all of his mental and physical faculties with him, but he's saying, why didn't they do something other than shoot him? And I mean, my first thought is, do you not understand that a knife is a deadly weapon? Have you seen the results of what a knife can do? And it just doesn't make sense.
Say that again, Rudy.
Can you hear me? Oh, I was going to say, could someone recap what happened in Philadelphia? Because I'm not quite sure everybody knows.
Sure. As I understand, and as Clay Taylor for DPSOA has mentioned, there was a gentleman or a citizen coming at law enforcement with a knife who was then, I believe, fired upon and was fatally wounded.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Yes.
So knife. And I'm not sure what occurred again. And that's kind of to the second part of our discussion that we'd like to get into in the last half of this hour. But Clay, go ahead and reiterate what you said, because then we can kind of step in that way.
Well, and real briefly, it's what I've heard in the news media is not, when we talk about trying these cases in the media, is I've heard at least 2 reports already. Well, the Philadelphia Police Department didn't have tasers, and not all of their agency was outfitted with tasers. Completely, in my mind, ignoring the fact that that's not a taser event in my mind. If you've got a man charging at you, which he was, there's at least one video that shows the 2 officers backing out of the way and trying to run as much as they can before he aggressively comes at them, and then they shoot him. I mean, that's not, you don't, we like to jokingly say, don't bring a knife to a gunfight, but there's a lot of truth in that. And at least two outlets that I've heard reporting is, well, Philadelphia PD is basically at fault because they didn't have tasers.
So Clay, to that point, okay, so obviously a weapon's considered, or a knife is considered a deadly weapon. And
Absolutely.
I haven't talked about before, and I guess it would really be helpful for you to elaborate to the audience at hand about this, is the difference, why an officer would resort to using a gun as opposed to that, depending on how that the suspect is armed or not armed, one of the two with that. Because to me, this goes into another discussion that Kevin had before, and it has to do with the attorneys. That needs to be discussed and educated by the department. You know, somebody needs to come out and explain that to the public at the beginning, get all the facts out there so they're cognizant of it. So then you're not having the media put out things like that when you're watching from Texas and you're like, wait a minute, that's not a taser event. That's a deadly weapon. So yeah, you're going to go use the least amount of force necessary to go ahead and stop it, in that capacity. Because the problem is most people don't know that. And so therefore, I mean, they already think that you can shoot everybody in their feet and their legs to stop people. You know what I mean? They think you're trained to do that.
Well, we have a candidate running for presidency that has basically said, shoot him in the leg.
No. Okay. But
Well, and Rudy, if you look what happened there, though, the city completely got out of control before anybody could do or say anything. The city completely lost its mind there. And, and then the whole police force is trying to defend the entire city before anybody could put any information out about really what occurred.
Well,
Well,
but
there's
Doug,
also-
but
there's
Doug,
also the
Doug
issue of the department.
says, go ahead, Kev.
The department is limited in how much information they can get out. They don't control the information flow. If the media is not going to cooperate, if you call a press conference and the press doesn't publicize it, what good is it doing? You know, I mean, the department can put it on their own Facebook page, their own social media, but they don't really control the information flow. The information flow is controlled by that persuasive media that we talked about a little while ago.
Yeah,
Instead of an informative media.
Well,
Put it
and,
this
and
way.
again,
Go ahead.
Yeah, no. I wanted to get to you. I was going to set you up, but if you're ready, go ahead and jump in.
Go ahead, Stephen. Go ahead.
I think Doug had mentioned this. He said, listen, the law enforcement agencies have to have some area within that is in lockstep with this media that can immediately get what they know and to tell the public what they know. It's going to take, like we've done, Kevin, establish a relationship so that we can go back and forth because that rapport is there and we can get things pushed out. If you don't have that rapport, and maybe, Kevin, that's why others who you reached out to may not have been as receptive, but you have to reach out to someone else to establish that relationship so that, again, you can have all the press conferences you want, but if nobody's picking up that information from your point of view, nobody will hear it. You may have the best information available for everyone, but if nobody's getting that and they're getting it from Johnny and Sally from the 5 and 6 and the 10, you're not going to get what really is going on. And Doug, you pointed to that weeks ago, that the PDs, the law enforcement agencies, must have a way to almost instantaneously say, hey, we can't give you everything, but this is what we know to the extent right now that's truthful and what we're working on that doesn't compromise this incident.
And when you look at the story, look at every outlet and what they put out there first. They feed that fire. Officers shoot a black man. That was their entire headline on CNN yesterday. That was their entire headline on the local media over there. You look at it. As an officer, I don't give a damn what color you are. If you're armed, you're armed. If you're coming at me, you're coming at me. I don't see color. I see a weapon in your hand. That's what it boils down to. And people don't understand that. They think, oh, look, we're out there hunting black men. Why? Because that's what the media puts out there. It's just not accurate. That guy dictated how that scene went. Those officers backed all the way around that car at least once, and then he continued to come at them. At some point, you got to say, what do you want us to do as law enforcement? You want us to go get in our car and leave and let that guy hack up half the neighborhood? Because obviously, the family wasn't controlling him. They tried. It wasn't working. That guy was hell-bent on doing what he did, and that's what got him shot. And I understand that there's other types of force, out there. There's tasers. They did not have them. There's rubber bullets. There's all this other stuff. But the average patrol officer doesn't have access to that. So in that, 2 minutes they're on that scene, they're limited as to how they can react.
That information needs to get out. Is the issue of not having the rubber bullets and whatnot a funding question? So if you're looking to defund, then you take away some of the alternatives that Philadelphia can use for its citizens, possibly, because you said, we're not rising to that level, or we're going to defund you even more. So you have one weapon, you've got whatever that uses, and do your best. You're professionally trained to the extent that we can give you, given our limits on funding, and do the best you can to protect and serve one of the largest cities in America.
And that's part of Austin's definition of defund, was to take away a lot of those intermediate force options. For example, the rubber bullets. The city of Austin City Council created a policy, said the Austin PD is no longer allowed to use rubber bullets whatsoever. Because, and by the way, let's point out, intermediate force options, less than lethal force options, they're not supposed to be pain free. They're all based upon pain compliance. And rubber bullets hurt, and they leave marks, they leave bruises, okay? But that's part of the impact they're supposed to have. They're supposed to gain compliance without using deadly force, without having to kill somebody. If we're gonna tell our officers, okay, we want you to use some sort of intermediate force option and gain compliance, but you cannot use anything that actually causes any harm or causes pain, it's just not going to work.
We don't have anything like that, and trust me,
it doesn't exist.
I know from my own enforcement of the rules. intermediate force that didn't emphasize some type of pain really didn't work well. They had to,
exactly.
Parental control, reasonable parental control, usually resulted in some sort of pain, which got my attention, which then therefore changed my actions and activity.
And you also have to factor in, if somebody is high on drugs, if somebody is in the middle of a mental health crisis, their tolerance of pain goes up exponentially, and therefore uses of pain compliance have to also go up exponentially. And I, by the way, I agree totally with you and Rudy. This is something that the general public needs to be much better educated about. But I think that it has to be a community effort. We can't say our law enforcement agencies have to do the educating, because there has to be some cooperation from our other community leaders and from our media.
Well, Kev, one of the things that our section of the bar is looking at is having town hall meetings. We want to have you, Doug, Travis, a part of these community town hall meetings. So now we can take what we've come together and pow out, and people can see live and recorded, and then take those to the community, so communities do understand that there are professionals reaching out that look like them, that are reaching out to law enforcement agencies across the state to get understanding, to get the opportunity to make inroads, not when there's a detriment, but when there is opportunity to inform, discuss, interact in a way that is a positive methodology, and not where we're looking to implement something that has to result in intermediate force or considering the option of deadly force. You're always going to have those elements of just bad guys and gals, the situation where the mental aspect comes in, and you're going to have people that are just trying to do everyday things that may come across instances that need law enforcement. all those combined, you don't know when they're going to happen. You don't know where they're going to happen. However, if we can take the time now and we can start setting things up and getting ahead of the curve, that's where we win, because we, as community leaders, as legal and law enforcement, can then make an inroad with these communities. I think the problem becomes, as we've always said, we're on the tail end of an incident, and you have that media effect that can incite. And now with social media, you don't just have your traditional outlets, you have people that can also get their own types of narrative out there, which could also murky the waters. We had mentioned, just for the audience sake to understand, there's a very different perspective in news reporting than we gave the example of sports reporting. And that's where Kevin has mentioned, in news reporting, you're more persuasive one way or the other, and you really have a linear effect of the news outlet giving information to the general public. In sports media, we at least try to have 2 or 3 people so that we can have different perspectives on what the situation looks like, what may be a solution to that, and then you can kind of draw the conclusion based on the group's interaction. Or if you have one person who is that news person in sports, they usually bring guests on that give a varying opinion or a professional opinion to the incidents that are happening in real time. So the differences of which news outlet, because the topic, when it comes to interaction with law enforcement, you don't get kind of the colloquial media reporting. You get something that is more persuasive. You get something that's more insightful or inciting to pull on your emotions, more so than in an instance of a sports fan.
Can we get an amen?
Well, Kev, I think it goes to the point that we were making offline before we did come forward and have this discussion here, is that persuasive or pushing people one way or the other is not necessarily always going to be the best way for that community to move forward.
So I am pulling up in front of the HPOU building now, and I've got to get somebody give me a parking spot. So I'm fixing to have to get off of this call.
And I as well, guys. I hate to leave you, but we got to get things. We both have to go get COVID tested before we can meet with the governor. So we're going to handle that. And I hope to see you guys next week.
Absolutely. We appreciate it.
Y'all take care.
All right. I know, Travis, it's us right now. I think we can conclude. Again, there's some things with the media and on these reporting incidents that we will need to vet through, and then have some new topics as well for next week.
Yeah, and I think that also goes, Stephen, when the media jumps to that first conclusion about things. Unfortunately, sometimes they influence the local governments. Unfortunately, some of the city councils and city managers and things like that, and at times there's knee-jerk reactions made, and that comes back around to like our less lethal capabilities. Some cities, after some of the riots, immediately banned tear gas and things of that nature. Well, that really limits what we have our availability to use. So we're back to using our stick or our shields, our guns, those types of things. And, we don't want to use those options.
Travis, shouldn't it make a lot of sense that when incidents that certainly can be reasonably expected to have possible civil unrest, that the council get with law enforcement agencies ahead of all of what may be reported, or at least even during that initial report to work together to have this? Why would there be such a pushback of not having your law enforcement agencies and and your government political subdivision electeds come together quickly?
Well, I mean, obviously everything's relative in time. And unfortunately, when most of these things happen, there isn't time for that to occur. And then, obviously.
But that's so critical, because if you could have that occur, at least the initial response from the electeds and your law enforcement would probably put the community at a better perspective, no?
No, that would be great if they could quickly have the information and start putting it out. I mean, that's they're supposed to be a representative of the community, and that'd be wonderful if they could do that. But unfortunately, many times, and think about this. I mean, people have lives too, and they can't always be around.
Well, again, I think that at least looking at what goes into the reporting and how it's reported, because it definitely has a distinct effect on how the community moves forward based on these incidents.
Absolutely.
Well, we'll conclude with that. Certainly appreciate everybody's time today, and we're going to be mindful of time and also of the tasks that we have. But again, another great discussion. And then again, I think, Travis, I want to get with Kevin and start putting together some of the things that we've discussed, what we've agreed upon, because I think there is a fair amount of information and decisions that we've agreed upon that could be useful coming into the next year, given legislative session and just what could be worked out even without legislation.
Yeah, absolutely. The legislative session is definitely going to be very, very interesting over the next several weeks leading up to March.
Absolutely. Travis, thanks again. Y'all, we appreciate you, and we'll catch up with you next week. Be safe. Thank you.
Sounds great. Thanks, Stephen. Bye-bye.
Okay. Take care.